If you're looking for some great budget decks to play in Magic Arena with Duskmourn standard, then I have 4 budget decks here that are pretty effective and quite fun to play depending on what kind of playstyle you like. So we're going to break down these decks along with some rare or mythic upgrades if you have the cards, make them even more effective. Here we go. Welcome back to the channel. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe if you haven't already. We're going to break down these 4 budget decks pretty quickly, and we're going to go through them one by one. So starting out with the budget Golgari Insidious Roots deck. So first of all, it's Insidious Roots, which is a great card to enable this whole strategy of going wide with plant tokens that get bigger and bigger. And what I really like about this, apart from the fact that it's an uncommon by itself, is that it works really well with Agatha's Soul Cauldron, which is just a fun one to play. It helps you exile things from your graveyard, but also control the opponent's graveyard. And you can put abilities from your creatures onto any other creature you own with a +1/+1 counter on it, which means pretty much all of these plant tokens you're going to make will have all different kinds of abilities. So in this deck, we've got things like creatures that have abilities that can exile themselves from the graveyard or in any other way enable the Insidious Roots text, which is creatures leaving your graveyard, you create the plant token, you add a +1 counter on it. So Fairy Dream Thief, a nice cheap creature that gets to surveil, which is important in this deck, but also can exile itself from the graveyard to draw a card if you need to dig a bit deeper. We've got the Ichor Drinker, a 1/1 lifelink creature that can exile itself from the graveyard again to create an incubator token, which includes +1 counters on it, so that also helps with having the abilities from Agatha's Soul Cauldron. We've got the Scornblade Berserker, a 0/1 backup 1 creature, so it puts a +1 counter on something and has the ability it can sacrifice itself to draw a card, so it can help you get a lot deeper when you have lots of tokens that can sacrifice themselves. Snarling Gorehound will allow you to surveil every time a creature with power 2 or less enters, which might be quite a lot, to be honest. And we also have the Haywire Might. It's a 1/1 creature that when it dies, you gain some life, but also the ability that can transfer onto other things. You can exile it, or you can sacrifice it to exile a non-creature artifact or non-creature enchantment the opponents might have. They might have something like the Overlords as a non-creature enchantment, and you can exile those. And then the new cards we've got from Duskmourn are the Insidious Fungus. It's a 1-mana, 1/2 creature that can sacrifice itself for 2 mana to destroy artifacts, enchantments, or to draw a card, and put a land from your hand onto the battlefield tapped. So there's lots of different things you can do with that, especially when you have Agatha's Soul Cauldron putting +1 counters on all your other creatures. We've got Say Its Name, which is a great way to mill some cards, and then you can return a creature from your graveyard to your hand, which triggers the roots, or a land if you need it. And when you have 3 of these in the graveyard, you can search for Altenak the Thrice Called and put it onto the battlefield, which is a very, very big uncommon creature. So it's a 7-mana, 9/9 trample. When it becomes a target of a spell or an ability the opponent controls, you get to draw a card. And if it's in your hand, you can discard it to return a land card from your graveyard to the battlefield tap, so it helps you ramp, potentially. But also, when you're doing the Say Its Name thing, you can look in your graveyard for Altenak. So if it's in your hand too early, you can get some benefit out of it. And we've also got Overlord of the Baelmerk. It's the black avatar impending creature from Duskmourn. When it enters or attacks, you can mill 4 cards and return a non-avatar creature or a planeswalker from your graveyard to your hand. Now, we don't have planeswalkers in this deck, but you could. You have roots out already. You can play the Overlord for 2 mana, mill 4 cards, bring back a creature from the graveyard, triggers roots, and basically you're going to get a lot of value out of that. And after 5 turns, it's going to turn to this 5/5 creature that can do that every turn. And if you draw this later on, you can just cast it for the normal cost, so it comes in as a creature straight away as well, which is pretty good. We've got some ways of getting other cards from your graveyard to your hand, because we don't want to have roots in the graveyard by accidentally milling it or something. So we have Urbog Repossession. You can return a creature from your graveyard to your hand, or you can pay the kicker cost, so 3 in total, to return another target permanent card from your graveyard to your hand as well. So you can return any permanent. So it can be a land, but it can be roots if it's in the graveyard. It can be an Agatha's Soul Cauldron if that's in the graveyard, and that's really important too. We've also got Peerless Recycling from Bloomburrow. 2 mana, green, instant. You can gift a card if you want to, but you basically return a permanent card from the graveyard to your hand, and if you promise a gift, so give the opponent an extra card, you can return 2 permanent cards from your graveyard to your hand. So if it's going to trigger roots, if it's going to trigger some other synergies or really help you out, then give them a card and get an extra one. We've also got another rare here, the Keen-Eyed Curator. So 2 mana, 3/3 creature from Bloomburrow. As long as there are 4 or more card types exiled with it, it gets +4/+4 and has trample. So it can be a 7/7 trample creature for 2 mana. But also, what's really good about this is not just that it can exile cards from a graveyard, which can trigger roots if you don't have Soul Cauldron or the other abilities that can exile themselves from the graveyard, but it can also take out your opponent's graveyard at instant speed. Now, Agatha's Soul Cauldron is good for this because you can wait for your opponent to choose a reanimation target, and you can tap Agatha's Soul Cauldron to exile that. But you can only do that once per turn because it's tapped. But with Keen-Eyed Curator, it's only 1 mana. You don't have to tap it to exile a card from a graveyard. So it's a really good way of controlling your opponent's graveyard because there are a lot of reanimation strategies at the moment. Some I really like to play as well. So it's really important to be able to have something to help control the opponent's graveyard. And if you do happen to have a curator in the graveyard and you exile it with Agatha's Soul Cauldron, then you have that 1 mana exile card from a graveyard on every creature that you have. So you're going to have this on pretty much everything. And it's not too hard to get the 4 different card types exiled with Keen-Eyed Curator, considering you can exile things from the opponent's graveyard. We have things like Haywire Might, that's an artifact and a creature. We have the Overlord, which is an enchantment and a creature. We have Evolving Wild, so you can get lands in the graveyard, but also we're going to be surveilling things quite a lot. So it's easy to fill your graveyard pretty quickly and to turn this into a 7/7 trample creature that they're going to want to try and kill. And if they can't, it's going to be a big problem for them. So with the mana base on this deck, and like the other decks we're going to look at, I've just put as much basic stuff in there as I can, but if you happen to have any rare lands that are 2 colors that cover the colors needed for this deck, then obviously include those as well. You can just go with swamps, forests. You can use the new card from Duskmourn, a new common 2-color land. If a player has 13 or less life, it comes in untapped, which is pretty good for a way to bring it in untapped later on. And obviously we have Evolving Wilds, but if you have Fable, you could use that instead, because then things come in untapped if it's the 4th land or later on. But Evolving Wilds is a great budget option for that as well. So that's everything for the Golgari Roots deck. Let me know what you think in the comments of this one. It's not one I see too often anymore, but it is one that's pretty powerful considering you don't need that many rares or mythics to do it. You can do it without the Overlord. You can do it without Agatha's Soul Cauldron or without the Curator, but I find it works a lot better with them, and Agatha's Soul Cauldron is just a fun one to play around with anyway. Next, we're going to look at the budget Azorius Auras deck. Now, this one is very, very Duskmourn. This is one I actually made up for the Duskmourn midweek Magic Constructed event, where you had to use basically everything from Duskmourn. I have swapped a couple of cards out, but generally it's a cheap enchantment, eerie aura deck, which uses some really, really cool cards that we've got in the white auras. So we've got Ethereal Armor, which can give a creature +1/+1 for each enchantment you control and give it first strike as well. We've got Shard Mage's Rescue, a flash enchantment, can give a creature +1/+1, but also hexproof on the turn it enters. And we've got Sheltered by Ghosts, which is an amazing card. 2 mana aura. Whenever it enters, you can exile a non-land permanent the opponent controls until it leaves the battlefield. It also gives the creature it's attached to +1 power, lifelink, and ward 2. So it starts to make your creatures not just big and difficult to deal with, and lifelink is just an amazing card for just 2 mana. So on top of that, we need to have some other creatures that are going to help to trigger these other abilities. So we've got things like Optimistic Scavenger, 1 mana, 1/1. whenever an enchantment enters, and whenever you unlock a room, you put a +1 counter on any creature. So usually it's a scavenger, but it could be anything else. We've also got Fear of Surveillance, which is a pretty decent common. 2 mana, 2/2 with Vigilance. It's also an enchantment creature, so it triggers Eerie, and when it attacks, you get to Surveil 1, so you help to filter through your deck. Other creatures we've got here, the Gremlin Tamer is a 2 mana, 2/2 human scout with Eerie, so whenever an enchantment you control enters or you unlock a room, you get to make a 1/1 red gremlin creature token. I don't know why it's red, but it is, and it gives you just other blockers and other targets that you can use depending on what you're facing. Sometimes you just need some chump blockers, so it's really good for that, or just generally going wide. And then we've got Inquisitive Glimmer. It's an enchantment itself, and it's a 2/3. Enchantment spells cost 1 less to cast, and unlock costs cost 1 less as well. So it helps us get those rooms out faster. We've also got Entity Tracker, which is a really cool thing to play at the end of turn 3 or on your opponent's turn 3, because it's got Flash and has Eerie. It's whenever an enchantment enters or whenever you unlock a room, you get to draw an extra card. So we get to basically fill our hand really quickly, because it's not like once per turn. We've got enchantment creatures, we've got auras, we've got a number of different rooms. So there are some really good ways to draw loads of extra cards. And the other ones we haven't covered so far, Feather of Flight is another flash aura, which is really cool. It gives a creature flying, you get to draw a card, it gets +1 as well. So if you don't have Entity Tracker, that's another way of basically drawing extra cards on your turn. And we've got Fear of Isolation. That's an enchantment as well. When it enters, or as an additional cost to cast it, you have to return a permanent you control to its owner's hand. So there's lots of different things you might want to return to your hand using this. You might want to return the rescue, so you get to have hexproof later on. You might just want to return Feather of Flight, so you can draw an extra card. You might want to return one of these rooms we've got here. Now they're over here because they technically have a high mana value overall, but they're really cheap, so we'll put them down here in a second. But we have Underwater Tunnel, a very cheap way to trigger Eerie. When you unlock a door, you surveil 2. And considering 4 mana can be discounted based on other things and can help you add +1 counters and draw cards, it's not a bad cost. 4 mana to Manifest Dread and put a +1/+1 counter on that creature. So you get a 3/3, which might be one of your creatures you can flip over if you need to. And we've got Grand Entryway. So it's 2 mana for the left-hand side. You get to unlock the room, but you also get to create an extra Glimmer enchantment creature, so it triggers Eerie twice. And then for 3 mana, the Elegant Rotunda allows you to put +1 counter on each of up to 2 target creatures, which isn't an amazing effect by itself, but it does just help trigger Eerie again, which might make a big difference. And we've got Bottomless Pool, so you can unlock this, return up to 1 target creature to its owner's hand, so you can send an opponent's creature back to their hand, or you can return something of yours back to your hand if you need to. And the Locker Room side for 5 mana. Whenever 1 or more creatures you control deal combat damage to a player, you get to draw an extra card. Now these things you might want to play like the Bottomless Pool side for 1 mana, and then you play Fear of Isolation, bring the Bottomless Pool back to your hand so you can play it again. So that's lots of triggers of Eerie on your turn to draw lots of extra cards and slow the opponent down. So technically, yeah, they are basically cheap things. Let's go 1 mana to do the first side of that, 2 mana for that, and 1 mana for that. So it's actually a really cheap deck. And again, like I said, with the lands, just gone with the basic lands, the new common from Duskmourn, and then Evolving Wilds. But if you have any other lands that you want to add into this that cover those colors that are rare, main lands, or the other fast lands, it's going to help you make this deck even more effective. And considering this deck only has 3 rare cards at the moment, that's 3 copies of Entity Tracker, that's not bad for a budget deck. And as for a couple of other rares you might want to add to the deck to make it even more effective, we could use the Silent Hall Creeper. So it's a 2 mana, 1/1 enchantment creature that can't be blocked. So when it does deal combat damage to the player, you get to choose one of these that hasn't been chosen before. You can put 2/+1 counters on it, so it's a 3/3 that can't be blocked. You can draw an extra card, or you can have it become a copy of another target creature you control. Now, when it becomes a copy of another target creature you control, it loses all the other abilities, so it's now blockable, but it also doesn't get the other things. So you want to put the +1 counters on it first, maybe, draw a card, maybe second, depending on what's happening. You can return it from the battlefield to your hand using either the bottomless pool or the fear of isolation if you want to. If you think you don't want it to become a copy of another creature you control, and play it again for another trigger of Eerie, possibly. And we've also got Enduring Innocence, which is a pretty cool card, another enchantment in itself. It's a 3-mana, 2/1 with lifelink, and whenever one or more creatures you control with power 2 or less enter, you get to draw a card. Now, with the Gremlin Tamer specifically, you're going to make lots of 1/1 Gremlin tokens. So, once per turn is the maximum on this, but you will get to draw an extra card pretty much every time you cast an enchantment or trigger Eerie if you don't have the entity tracker. So it kind of does a similar thing, apart from the entity tracker is going to do that even more than once per turn. But also, if the opponent kills this, it turns from being an enchantment creature into returning to the battlefield as an enchantment, so that triggers Eerie again, even when they kill it, which is pretty cool. So let me know what you think of this deck in the comments. It's been pretty good. These auras are amazing, and you can use it in a red and white aura deck. You can do it in a green and white aura deck, which I quite like as well. You can kind of go for mono white, but it tends to work a bit better with one of these other colors, I think. But yeah, let me know what you think of these auras in the comments. The next one we're going to look at is a budget white tokens deck. So it's based generally around having Caretaker's Talent, which is one of the rares in this version, which can basically just draw you lots of extra cards. You can copy tokens, and you can use it as a finisher to give all of your tokens +2/+2. So if you go wide enough, you're going to have loads of creatures. They're going to be really high power and difficult to deal with. So generally, we want to make tokens and go as wide as possible. We need to have some removal in the deck. So we've got Lay Down Arms because it's mono white. We've got some ossification as well. Obviously, we're using basics. That's pretty good. We've also got some creatures. So we've got Novice Inspector. It creates a clue token. If you happen to have a Caretaker's Talent, then the clue token entering will trigger drawing a card, as well as being able to sacrifice that later to draw a card. So it just helps you get something out to start with. We've got the Builder's Talent. It's an enchantment. It creates a 0/4 defender creature. For if you pay 1 more mana on that to upgrade it to level 2, whenever one or more non-creature, non-land permanents enter, you put a +1 counter on a creature you control. So the clue token from that can also trigger that and put an extra +1 counter on things. And then when you get to level 3 on Builder's Talent, you can return a non-creature, non-land permanent from your graveyard to the battlefield. And there's a few different things you might want to use with that here. Carrot Cake is a really good common. Creates you 2 rabbit tokens. Gets you to scry 1 twice and also gain 3 life. So, and also triggers other things like non-creature, non-land permanents entering. So it's really good. Obviously, making the tokens is going to trigger Caretaker's Talent as well. So we're drawing lots of cards. We've also got Resolute Reinforcements to be able to go a little bit wider and also create a Soldier token at instant speed. We've got Hop to it to create 3 more rabbit creature tokens. So lots of ways of creating tokens. And we've got Stroke of Midnight as a general removal. So it's compared to Get Lost, this is uncommon, and it gives the opponent a 1/1 creature token. And Get Lost gives them the map tokens, but it's also only 2 mana, but it also won't hit artifacts. So between Stroke of Midnight and Get Lost is better, and I probably would include it in this deck if you have it, but Stroke of Midnight is pretty good for dealing with artifacts as well. And then we've got Toby, Beastie Befriender, which is another one that works as a kind of glue to stick all this together. We want to make as many creatures as possible and as many creature tokens as possible, because when Toby enters, it's a 1/1 that makes a 4/4, which 4/4 we can copy with Caretaker's Talent and all that stuff as well. But also the Beast can't attack or block by itself. It has to have another one to attack or block. So if you make an extra beast, you now have 2 4/4s that can both block or attack at the same time. But with Toby on the battlefield, if you control 4 or more creature tokens, and creature tokens you control have flying, and considering Caretaker's Talents can make them extra big tokens as well, going really wide and giving all your tokens flying means it's going to be really hard for your opponent to block everything. We've also got Season of the Burrow, which is a mythic card from Bloom Burrow. It's really, really good. We can make 5 rabbits if we really want to. We can exile a non-land permanent the opponent controls. when we can return a permanent card with mana value 3 or less from our graveyard to the battlefield with an indestructible counter on it. And considering we have lots of really good things we can return from the graveyard to the battlefield, that's going to be useful. We can return a Toby, we can return a Caretaker's Talent, we can return a Builder's Talent or a Carrot Cake or an Ossification if we want to, or a Novice Inspector, but it's like, you know, the lowest value thing. But if we really needed to, we could return that. So generally, like I said, the strategy is to go wide as possible with tokens and then just get them flying, get them big, and beat the opponent down with it. Now, in the sideboard, there are some things that we could include to make this even more effective. We could probably use Get Lost instead of Stroke of Midnight if we really want to. Like I said, it's better in most situations. We've got Overlord of the Mistmoors, which is a really good way of making extra tokens. It makes 2/1 white insect creature tokens with flying every time it enters or attacks. So it's a great way of getting it down for 4 mana to make 2 tokens, or later on to put it down for 7 mana, or wait for the impending tokens to come off, counters to come off, so you can start attacking with it every time you attack and making lots more creature tokens. That's really good for making tokens. We've also got Doll Maker's Shop, which is pretty cool as well. It's on the 2 mana side. Whenever 1 or more non-toy creatures you control attack a player, which is basically all of our creatures, we get to create an extra 1/1 artifact creature token, which is nice. And for the 6 mana side, the Porcelain Gallery, creatures we control have base power and toughness each equal to the number of creatures you control. So another one that really rewards us for going very wide, especially if we have flying on our creature tokens, or if we have Caretaker's Talent making them bigger anyway. This is going to give all the creatures, I don't know, maybe an extra +6/+6, depending on how much you have. So Dollmaker's Shop, Porcelain Gallery is a really good way of rewarding a go wide token strategy as well. So let me know what you think of this one in the comments. We've tried to keep the rares and mythics as low as possible, but we do have Toby, we have Caretaker's Talent, and we have Season of the Burrow. If you have those, you're going to be really good. If you don't have Season of the Burrow, you can probably still do this. Caretaker's Talent's probably the most important, and Toby as well, but Season of the Burrow is just a really cool card. So yeah, let me know what you think of this one in the comments. And then I've saved this one for last, but you've probably seen it before. It's the budget red Leyline version of this deck. So the only rares you need for this deck to work from Duskmourn is the Leyline of Resonance. It's a 4 mana enchantment. If it's in your opening hand, you may begin the game with it on the battlefield, so you don't have to pay that 4 mana. And whenever you cast an instant or sorcery that targets only a single creature you control, you get to copy it, and you can choose new targets for the copy if you want to. So, like other red fling decks these days with Cacophony Scamp and Heartfire Hero, you want to target these creatures with instants and sorceries that's going to make them really big. And then, if you need to, we can use Callous Sellsword or the sorcery side of this Burn Together to fling that creature at the opponent as well. So we've just got other creatures that are going to help us do that. We've got Cacophony Scamp that can sacrifice itself. We've got the Heartfire Hero, which we know is really good. We've got the Monastery Swift Spear, which has been around since Brothers War, and one day it will rotate, but it's just in like every mono red deck. And then we have Picnic Ruiner as well, because if we can make a creature power 4 or greater, it also gives itself double strike, which is pretty useful. And we've got instants and sorceries, actually just instants, that will target our creatures and help them get really, really big. So Dreadmore's Ire can give a creature +2/+2 and trample, and can destroy and target artifact that player controls if they happen to have artifacts. But just the +2/+2 and trample is pretty good anyway. We've got Felonious Rage, giving it another +2 attack and haste for the creatures that don't have haste, and can make a 2/2 detective creature to replace it if it happens to die. Got Monstrous Rage, which will give it +2/+0 till end of turn, and make the monster roll token, which gives it the trample as well, and extra +1/+1. And we have Turn Inside Out from Duskmourn to give a creature +3 power. As if +2 wasn't enough, it gives it +3 till end of turn, and when it dies, you get to manifest Dread. So if you use this on a creature, maybe a Cacophony Scamp, you attack with that, it's a 1/1, you have a Leyline of Resonance out, you can target it twice with Inside Out, which means you're going to give it +6, so it's doing 7 damage. It can sacrifice itself. It can do an extra 7 damage when it sacrifices itself, so that's 14 damage on turn 2 with this, and also you get to manifest Dread twice when it dies when you sacrifice it. So yes, you can do lots and lots with that, but it's even worse if you attack with one of these, turn it inside out, and then after they hit, use Colour Sellsword and get to fling it to do the final damage. So you can do over 20 damage on turn 2. This is a potential turn 2 win deck. And like I said, we only have these 4 rares in the deck, but there might be some other rare creatures you might want to replace the Swift Spear or the Picnic Ruiner with, possibly. We've got the Emberheart Challenger, which is another really good one from Bloomburrow. If you're going really hard on mice, then Manifold Mouse is really good because it can give them double strike or trample till the end of turn. And, you know, if they don't have trample, they're going to need it. If they do have trample, or if there's no blockers, double strike is going to make a huge difference. And we've got Slick Shot Show Off, which we know is a really good creature in mono red in these kind of decks. So it's going to do loads of damage to the opponent in the air and fling itself, if needed, for loads of extra damage at the end. But you can try this out with the lower rarity version, with this budget version, if you don't have the other ones. But I think if you have them, I'd include them anyway. But let me know what you think of this deck in the comments and these upgrades. So that's all for those 4 budget decks. Let me know what you think of all of them in the comments, which ones you prefer, what upgrades you would include, if you think any are much more effective than any others, or if you have any other budget deck suggestions you want me to have a look at. Don't forget to leave them all in the comments, and I will include links to these deck lists in the comments as well. So if you want to just copy them, you can do that. So that's all we've got to say on that. So thanks for watching this video to the end, and I will see you in the next one.